Imagine this. You're standing over an open human skull, staring down at a tumor tangled around the artery that supplies blood to half of a living brain. One wrong millimeter to the left, and this 63-year-old grandmother will never speak again. One wrong millimeter to the right, and she will never wake up. Your hands cannot tremble, your focus cannot break, and 12 people in this operating room are waiting for you to make a cut that no machine on this planet can make for you. That's a Wednesday for a senior neurosurgeon, but getting to that room took 14 years of training, $300,000 in debt, and a chain of sacrifices that borders on self-destruction. It meant studying while your friends slept, operating while your family celebrated holidays without you, and standing for 16 hours straight while someone's entire future hung on the steadiness of your fingers. Most people see a neurosurgeon and think, rich doctor, fancy car, God complex. They have absolutely no idea what it actually cost to reach that operating table. The path from college freshman to the person trusted to cut into a living human brain is the longest, most punishing, and most emotionally devastating journey in all of medicine. And here's a number to carry with you through this. Fewer than 240 neurosurgery residency spots open each year in the United States, for roughly 7,000 applicants who all want them. It starts long before anyone hands you a scalpel. It starts with a decision at 19 that will swallow the next 14 years of your life and take nearly everything you have. You're sitting in an organic chemistry lecture hall with 300 other pre-med students, and the professor just told you that 60% of this room will change their major before sophomore year ends. Organic chemistry is the unofficial gatekeeper of medicine, a subject so dense, so abstract, and so brutally unforgiving that it has ended more medical dreams than every admissions committee in the country combined. You spend nights drawing molecular structures, memorizing reaction mechanisms that look like subway maps designed during a nervous breakdown, and reading the same paragraph 11 times before any of it clicks. This is just one of a dozen prerequisite courses: biology, physics, biochemistry, statistics. Each one a locked door that only opens if your grade is high enough to turn the handle. Your cumulative GPA needs to stay above 3.7 for all 4 years, meaning one bad final in freshman biology follows you around like a scar on your transcript that never heals. You volunteer at hospitals on weekends, shadow neurosurgeons before dawn, run a research project in a lab you practically live in, and maintain a social life that consists entirely of study groups and caffeine. Then comes the MCAT, the Medical College Admission Test. 8 hours of biology, chemistry, physics, psychology, and reasoning compressed into a single day that feels less like an exam and more like cognitive warfare. The average score is 500 out of 528, but anyone serious about neurosurgery needs 518 or above, the top 3% of everyone who took it, no exceptions and no rounding up. You score well, apply to 30 schools at $40 each, fly across the country for interviews on borrowed money, and then sit in silence for months until a single email rewrites your entire future. You're accepted, the celebration lasts 20 minutes, and then the math arrives like a freight train. 4 years of medical school, $250,000 of debt, interest accruing from day one. First year is a fire hose of raw information aimed directly at your skull: anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, pharmacology. You memorize the name, location, and function of every bone, nerve, and artery in the human body. You hold a human brain for the first time in anatomy lab, and the weight shocks you. About 3 pounds, the texture of firm gelatin, 86 billion neurons connected by 100 trillion synapses. Every structure you touch has a name and a purpose, and damaging any one of them during surgery could erase a lifetime of memories, paralyze a limb, or permanently alter who someone is. The margin for error in this organ isn't small. It doesn't exist, because a millimeter of healthy tissue can be the difference between a patient who walks out and a patient who never wakes up. Second year shifts from memorizing healthy tissue to understanding disease. You learn how tumors invade, how blood vessels rupture, how a single clot the size of a grain of rice can shut down half a brain. Third year throws you into hospitals for clinical rotations, surgery, internal medicine, pediatrics, psychiatry. 12-hour shifts where you learn by doing and try not to collapse from exhaustion before the week is over. You rotate through neurosurgery for the first time, and the attending lets you hold a retractor during a craniotomy. 7 hours of standing perfectly still while someone operates on a living brain inches from your face. Your arm goes completely numb after hour 3, but you don't move and you don't complain, because the surgeon is removing a glioblastoma from the motor cortex, and the patient's ability to walk depends on nobody flinching. The operation ends, the patient is wheeled to recovery, and you walk out of the OR knowing 2 things. You want to do this for the rest of your life, and you have no idea if you're good enough. Fourth year is application season. You take step 1 and step 2 of the medical licensing exam, scoring in the top 5%, because anything below that and neurosurgery programs won't even open your file. You apply to 80 programs, receive 15 interview invitations, and spend 2 months crisscrossing the country in budget hotels, trying to prove you deserve one of those 240 spots in the entire nation. Match day arrives. Every medical student in America opens an envelope at the same time and learns where they'll spend the next phase of their life, and your hands are shaking so hard you nearly tear the paper. You matched into neurosurgery. The room erupts around you, but underneath the joy, you feel something closer to terror, because you know exactly what a neurosurgery residency demands from the people who enter it. 7 years, the longest residency in all of medicine, tied with cardiothoracic surgery for the title of most relentless training program a human being can willingly enter and hope to survive intact. You show up on day 1 as a PGY1, postgraduate year 1, and your life compresses into a loop of rounding on patients at 5 a.m., checking drains, reading overnight scans, and updating charts. Every morning by 6:30, you present each case to your attending with the speed of an auctioneer and the accuracy of a court reporter. Hesitate on a detail and the entire room notices. Then you scrub into surgery, and for the first 2 years, your job is to watch, hold retractors, suction blood from the surgical field, and close the wound after the senior resident does the real work. You stand for 10, 12, sometimes 18 hours in a single operation, and you cannot sit, you cannot lean, and your focus cannot slip for even half a second while someone's brain is exposed. The operating room runs on silence and absolute precision. The attending calls for instruments without looking up. The scrub nurse anticipates every request, and one moment of confusion can kill a patient in minutes. Your first year salary is roughly $62,000. Divide that by the 80 to 100 hours you work each week, and your real hourly rate drops to about $12. below most fast food wages. You carry $250,000 in student debt, growing by $15,000 a year in interest alone. Your balance climbs faster than you can pay it, and attending money is still 7 impossible years away. Your college friends are buying houses, getting married, having children, building entire lives. You're eating cafeteria food at midnight and sleeping on a call room mattress thinner than the textbooks that put you here. Every third or fourth night you're on call, a full day of work, then an overnight shift, operating through the dark if trauma arrives, then working the entire next day before you're allowed to go home. That's a 30-hour stretch, and it's not an exception, it's the standard. Your body runs on coffee, adrenaline, and a survival instinct that you didn't know you had until it was the only thing keeping you upright. Your relationships strain in ways you didn't expect. You cancel plans so often your partner stops making them. You miss birthdays, you miss anniversaries, and the people who love you start learning to live without you. By year 3, they let you pick up the scalpel. Small cases at first, then progressively more dangerous procedures as you prove you can be trusted with a drill, a blade, and an open skull. You perform your first craniotomy under supervision, cutting a window in the bone with a pneumatic drill, lifting the flap, slicing through the dura mater, and exposing the surface of a brain that pulses with every heartbeat. The brain moves, it swells, it shifts, it breathes with the patient, and you're operating on a living target, surrounded by structures that a single wrong touch could destroy beyond any hope of repair. Your attending watches your hands through loops that magnify everything 4 times. Your technique, your tremor, your hesitation, every micro movement of your fingers amplified under lenses that forgive nothing and hide nothing. You remove a small meningioma from the brain's outer lining. 4 hours for a case your attending would finish in 90 minutes. But you do it cleanly and nobody's harmed. And that is enough. You drive home and sit in your car in the parking garage for 20 minutes, gripping the wheel, processing the fact that you just reached into someone's skull and physically changed the architecture of their brain. Years 4 and 5, you become the senior resident. Now juniors call you at 3 a.m. and you make decisions that used to go up the chain because there is nobody between you and the attending. You don't wake the attending unless someone might die, so you read the CT, assess the patient, weigh the risks, and make the call alone in a hallway at 3:15 in the morning. A motorcycle crash comes through the trauma bay. No helmet, subdural hematoma expanding on the scans so fast you can nearly watch the blood pooling in real time across sequential images on your screen. You call the attending, scrub in, drill a burr hole in the skull and release the pressure. Blood rushes out, the brain decompresses, and the intracranial pressure drops from 40 to 12 in seconds. The patient wakes 3 days later, recognizes his wife, asks what happened. You saved his brain, his memories, his personality, his ability to exist as the person he was before the crash. And he has no idea who you are. Years 6 and 7, you're the chief resident, running the neurosurgery service, teaching juniors, scheduling operations, and handling cases that most surgeons in other specialties would send to someone else entirely. You operate on the spine, removing herniated discs, fusing vertebrae, decompressing spinal cords being crushed by bone spurs just millimeters away from causing permanent paralysis that no amount of therapy could reverse. You operate on children. Tiny skulls, developing brains, conditions like hydrocephalus, where you implant a shunt to drain fluid that would otherwise crush a growing brain slowly and silently from the inside out. You perform your first awake craniotomy. The patient is conscious, eyes open, talking to a neurologist while you probe the exposed surface of their brain with an electrical stimulator to map which regions you cannot cut. You ask them to count, to name objects, to move their fingers, and when the stimulator touches a spot that makes them pause mid-sentence or drop a hand, you know that's the line you don't cross. The tumor sits 5 millimeters from that boundary, and you resect it with instruments so fine they make watchmaking tools look like equipment designed for demolishing buildings. Precision measured in fractions of millimeters, not whole ones. The patient walks out of the hospital 3 days later, speaking clearly, moving normally, tumor gone, and the feeling that rises in your chest is something no grade, no diploma, and no paycheck can produce. 7 years of residency end, and you are technically a neurosurgeon, but many go further, adding 1 to 2 years of fellowship training in a subspecialty that deepens the expertise even beyond what residency built. Pediatric neurosurgery, skull base, cerebrovascular, functional, spine, neuro-oncology. Each one a narrower and deeper layer of mastery in a field that already took longer to learn than most complete careers from beginning to end. You choose cerebrovascular surgery, aneurysms, arteriovenous malformations, strokes, the things that kill people in seconds when they rupture and demand interventions so precise the instruments are calibrated in fractions of a millimeter. You spend a fellowship year clipping aneurysms under a surgical microscope, each one a bulging, weak spot on a brain artery that can burst without warning and drown the cranial cavity in blood. 40% of patients with a ruptured aneurysm die before they ever reach a hospital. The ones who make it to your operating table are the ones who still have a chance. And you are that chance. You place a tiny titanium clip across the neck of the bulge, sealing it while preserving blood flow through the parent artery. 1 millimeter too far and the vessel tears and the patient bleeds out on the table. Fellowship ends and you sign your first attending contract. You read the salary figure 3 times because after 14 years of poverty-level wages, the number on the page genuinely does not feel like it belongs to your life. $350,000 to $600,000 a year, depending on location, subspecialty, and whether you chose academics or private practice. The highest starting compensation of any medical specialty in the country. Senior neurosurgeons at major academic centers earn between $700,000 and over $1 million annually. And anyone who thinks that money came easy hasn't read this far in the story. But the salary shows up with a weight that no contract warns you about. You are now the final decision maker, the person called at 2 in the morning when every other option has been tried and someone's brain is dying. Your phone buzzes at 3 a.m. Ruptured aneurysm, a 41-year-old mother of 3, found unconscious on her bathroom floor by her husband. CT scan showing blood flooding the space around her brain. Drive to the hospital in 12 minutes, scrub in, open her skull, and find a ruptured anterior communicating artery aneurysm pumping blood into spaces where blood should never be. You clip it, evacuate the hemorrhage, close the wound, and wait. She lies in a coma for 9 days while her brain swells, spasms, and fights to survive the damage that nearly took her. On day 10, she opens her eyes, squeezes her husband's hand, and says his name, and you feel something that medical school never taught and no page in any textbook has ever been able to describe. This is why you sacrificed your 20s, your sleep, your relationships, and very nearly your sanity, for the moment when a person who was supposed to die opens their eyes and says the name of someone they love. But not every case ends with open eyes and grateful families, and the ones that don't will stay inside you for the rest of your career, whether you invite them or not. A 14-year-old with a diffuse intrinsic pontine glioma, a brainstem tumor that cannot be removed, cannot be cured, and will kill him, wrapped inside a body that still has energy and a mind that still has plans. You sit with his parents and tell them surgery cannot help, and they look at you the way people look at the last door at the end of a long hallway when you've just told them it's locked. You walk to the parking garage, sit in your car, and cry, not because you're weak, but because you are human, and the part of you that chose this work believed you could save every single person who needed you. You can't, and learning to carry that truth without letting it crush your ability to walk back into the operating room tomorrow is the hardest skill in neurosurgery. Harder than any procedure, any exam, any shift. Malpractice insurance costs $80,000 to $300,000 a year in this specialty, because the gap between a good outcome and a catastrophic one is sometimes thinner than a human hair. You will be sued. The question is when, not whether. Because when brain surgery goes wrong, the devastation is so complete that someone will always look for someone to blame, and you are the name on the chart. Senior neurosurgeons perform procedures that belong in science fiction. Deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's disease, threading electrodes into the subthalamic nucleus, a target 5 millimeters wide, buried 8 centimeters below the brain's surface. You navigate using a stereotactic frame bolted to the patient's skull, MRI coordinates plotted to sub-millimeter accuracy, and microelectrode recordings that let you hear individual neurons firing as the probe descends through layers of living tissue. When you hit the right cluster of cells, the patient's tremor stops mid-shake. A hand that has been shaking for 10 years goes perfectly still, and the patient stares at it like they're watching something impossible happen. You perform hemispherectomies on children with catastrophic epilepsy, disconnecting half the brain entirely to stop seizures that were systematically destroying a child's ability to develop, to speak, to learn, and to grow into a person. The remaining hemisphere rewires itself over months, absorbing functions the removed side once controlled. Neuroplasticity so extreme it rewrites everything neuroscience thought it understood about how far a brain can recover. Endoscopic approaches let you reach tumors through the nose. No incision, no craniotomy. Threading instruments through the nasal passage to the skull base to remove pituitary masses that were causing blindness or hormonal collapse. The patient goes home the next day with no visible scar and restored vision, and their co-workers will never know that someone was operating inside their skull less than 48 hours earlier with tools thinner than a pencil. You're 57 now, 30 years in neurosurgery, thousands of operations, thousands of lives changed by the steadiness of your hands and the precision of your judgment in moments when neither was allowed to fail. And you notice the weight that this profession rarely talks about aloud, the accumulated mass of every patient you lost, every family you broke news to, every call that dragged you from your own life at 3 a.m. Over 60% of neurosurgeons report symptoms of burnout, and the divorce rate runs well above the already brutal average for physicians. The cost of being available to save strangers is measured in pieces of your own family. You missed first steps, school plays, anniversaries, quiet Sunday mornings, and the people who needed you at home learned to live without you, because the people who needed you at the hospital couldn't wait. But on a quiet morning, you walk into the operating room, lower the microscope, and look down at the most complex object in the known universe. 3 pounds of tissue holding every thought, every memory, every dream a person has ever had. And you are one of roughly 5,000 people on this planet who have been trained and trusted to touch it with a blade and reshape what's broken inside it. You think about that 19-year-old in the chemistry lecture hall, terrified and overwhelmed, dreaming of something enormous without the faintest understanding of the price, and you realize that kid had no idea what this would cost. But that kid also had no idea what it would feel like to stop a hand from trembling after a decade, to watch a mother wake from a coma, to give a child a future that a tumor tried to steal. Every year, every level, every sleepless night built something no shortcut could replicate: the steady hands, the quiet certainty, the ability to stand over an open skull and know exactly what to do while everyone else holds their breath. If you ever meet someone who tells you they're a neurosurgeon, know that they walked a path most people cannot begin to imagine. 14 years of training, $250,000 in debt, and 1,000 sacrifices that nobody else will ever see. And given the chance to start over, knowing everything about the cost, the exhaustion, the grief, and the weight that never fully lifts, every single one of them would walk that same road all over again. If this changed the way you think about the person who might one day hold your brain in their hands, subscribe, because every video on this channel will change the way you see something you thought you already understood.